Hi. This is the start of our online classes for state and local public finance. Wish we could be doing this under better circumstances. Actually, I wish I wasn't doing this at all. I'm a classroom teacher, not an online teacher. The first thing is, I hope all of you and your families and loved ones are safe and well. Most important thing you could be doing is being safe and well. Far more important than anything we're going to discuss today, that's for sure. That being said, we are going to have a series, 3 or 4 state online classes for our state and local public finance class. I was going to get dressed up. I'm actually sporting our GW colors today. And I hope you can see this video okay. My daughter helped me set it up, but I'm kind of a techno idiot. So today's class is going to be on other taxes. This is actually the class we were going to have before spring break. So today we're going to do other state and local taxes. Next week, I'm going to do a video on non-tax revenue. And that's going to include intergovernmental aid. So we're going to do intergovernmental aid, user fees, gambling next week. The other thing you should know is I think I'm doing this in 2 bites, because it's too much to download. So I'm going to do this in 2 segments, this class and next week's class, and then the following class, which will be on the property tax. You guys fall asleep in class, so I can't even imagine how painful this is. That being said, okay, so I'm just going to get on with it and talk until I get tired of talking, which is just like class. In any event, in addition to personal and corporate income tax, I have notes over there, so I'm going to be glancing at them. In addition to personal and corporate income taxes and sales taxes, state and local governments impose a variety of other taxes, some of which we talked about and hit upon during our studies so far. The most important of these other taxes are excise, severance, and wealth transfer taxes. Together, these 3 types of taxes make up about 27% of total state tax revenue. They make up only about 11% of total of state revenue, if you include everything, and they make up a tiny percentage of local government revenue. Local governments just don't impose excise taxes, severance taxes, or estate taxes in any real way. So let's talk about excise taxes. And we have talked about excise taxes in a number of different ways during the semester. You know I am not a fan, and that hasn't changed. Coronavirus didn't make me a fan of excise taxes. Adam Smith said they were the work of the devil, and I still think that's true, mainly because they're focused on one product, one activity. The government gets to decide who gets taxed, who doesn't get taxed. So the government's sort of picking who the winners and losers are. That is much less satisfying than having a broad-based tax on everyone or everything. They certainly violate many of the principles we discussed throughout the semester. They're not horizontally equitable, right? We tax consumption of some products and not others. And they complicate the system pretty decidedly. But rather than me complain about all of this, let's talk a little bit more about how they work, which is much more important. So states raise a significant amount of revenue from excise taxes, which, if you look on the census pages, which I would encourage you to do, especially if you have time on your hands, always refer to as special or selective taxes on census. And excise encompass many diverse types of taxes, right? We tax alcohol, we tax fuel, tobacco. We have special taxes on hotel rooms and car rentals. Now, increasingly, marijuana. And it's a little bit more complicated than that because, for instance, all states tax alcohol to some extent. And every state imposes different taxes on beer versus wine versus liquor. And all states tax tobacco and tobacco products, but they impose separate and different taxes on cigarettes versus cigars, chewing tobacco, and now vaping and e-cigarettes, right? So they all have different tax bases and different tax administration. So it's actually more complicated than most people would think, and more complicated than would first appear. Same thing with fuel taxes, by the way. Every state taxes some fuel products in some way, but they tax diesel fuel differently than gasoline and other petroleum products, and so that's complicated. The best known excise taxes, of course, are on alcohol. And alcohol, I actually went and bothered to look this up because I have a lot of time on my hands as well. Alcohol taxes account, well, first of all, excise taxes in total in 2018, the states raised $164 billion from excise taxes, all in. And that is about 16%, 17% of total state tax revenue. So it's pretty sizable, right? It's $164 billion. It dwarfs the corporate income tax and most other taxes. Of that amount, the largest part of that is on fuel, right? So the fuel component of that 164 billion is fuel taxes, various kinds of fuel taxes, and that accounts for about $49 billion. And again, you can look this up on the census website. Tobacco products are only, I say only, about $20 billion nationwide. So it's a lot of people think that cigarette taxes are the biggest, but actually gas taxes are far bigger. And of those big three, alcohol taxes are actually the smallest, right? So alcohol taxes, I'm glancing to my right because I have it up here. Alcohol taxes or excise taxes are only about $8 billion nationwide. So it's actually pretty tiny in the big scheme of things. And I've said before, might be a good place to repeat it, that the classic rationale for an excise tax is to pay for externalities, to pay for societal costs that are not borne by the marketplace. Cigarettes being a classic example where you smoke, you get sick. There's a societal cost through Medicare, Medicaid, and so on and so forth that is not borne by buying cigarettes at the 7-Eleven. So that justifies an excise tax. And so it's funny because the externalities from alcohol use are far greater than the tax revenue from the alcohol excise taxes. Okay, that's most exciting. I really don't like this online thing between you and me, but we're gonna suck it up and we're gonna do it, and you're gonna graduate. Except for those people who aren't graduating. So, anyway, moving on to excise taxes. The excise tax on marijuana products right now, I couldn't find a total number for it. I don't know what it is. It's actually, it's tiny compared to the other ones. The administration of excise taxes, other than it's a little bit complicated, is actually pretty easy. They are the difference between a sales tax and an excise tax is that excise taxes are per unit taxes, right? We tax a gallon of beer, pack of cigarettes, so on and so forth. And therefore, it's actually pretty easy to administer. It's complicated in some ways because there's a lot of different taxes. On the other hand, you can't sell beer without it being taxed. You can't sell cigarettes, and it's pretty easy to stay on top of that for the states. And they don't really create a lot of problems. The biggest problem with excise taxes is with cigarette taxes and cigarette smuggling. So you take states that have very high cigarette taxes. I think Vermont's got the highest state level cigarette tax in the country. And you end up with a lot of smuggling. The higher the tax, the more smuggling you're going to have. So people will either buy cigarettes in North Carolina or Virginia or Missouri, where the tax rates are very low, or they'll buy them on Indian reservations where there's no state tax, and they will sneak them into Vermont or Illinois or New York or other places, and that's the biggest administrative problem. Hard to do it because you can't really sell it to the 7-Eleven or the grocery stores or any real business. So it's all black market. Yet it's a big problem. Some of you may be aware of the I can't remember what his first name was, Gardner. That young man who was killed in New York a couple of years ago. Basically, he was selling smuggled cigarettes, untaxed cigarettes, and he lost his life for it. It's crazy. In any event, that's the single biggest problem. From a rationale for the tax, again, I mentioned there's only one rationale for the tax, and that's to pay for externalities. Unfortunately, especially with respect to tobacco, and increasingly with respect to marijuana taxes, that is not the case. So we look at this is actually very important. This might be the important part of this segment. We look at tobacco taxes, right? And so some people want to tax tobacco because they hate people who smoke. Some people want to tax tobacco because they see it legitimately as a public health issue. Very few people want to tax it for the externalities. They're doing it for political reasons. They're doing it for heartfelt public health reasons. Some people want to tax tobacco because they want to tell you how to live. And that's to be expected. We don't tax from a rationale standpoint. We don't tax alcohol as heavily, partly because of prohibition didn't work very well. Trying to get rid of booze didn't work very hard, and certainly booze does not have the same stigma as smoking. Right? Nobody turns their nose up and whatever about alcohol use like they do about smoking. Lost my train of thought for a second. Marijuana taxes are all about the money, 100% about the money, because you're going to legalize, and everybody says, "Wow, we can legalize and we can have cash coming in for schools. These kids are important." In any event, it is now Well, it doesn't really matter what time it is, doesn't it? I'm sorry. One thing about excise taxes, I talk about, and this is actually very important as well, is gasoline taxes. Because while I don't like excise taxes much, I do like gasoline taxes. Gasoline taxes are a good tax. Gas taxes are good taxes. The reason gas taxes are good taxes is because they act like user fees. So what does that mean? Well, user fees, and we're going to talk about user fees next week, but user fees are efficient, effective ways to raise revenue when you can. There's a lot of limitations on it. So you have if you drive, you buy gas. You buy gas, you pay gas tax. You go tear up the roads, and we use the gas tax revenue to fix the roads. And we keep repeating that. You keep driving, you keep buying gas, we keep paying gas taxes, we keep fixing the roads. There is a direct correlation between your usage of the public service of roads and the gas tax. And that is a good thing. That is a great thing. And so it's an excise tax, technically an excise tax, because it is per unit. It is a special tax on a product, and it is on a per unit basis, not on a ad valorem or by valued basis. So it's an excise tax, but a good excise tax. Now, the challenge with the gas tax, and I think we talked about this in one of our earlier classes, but it bears repeating, is that's great, except in the age of better gas mileage and electric cars and hybrid cars and Priuses and Volts and so on and so forth, Teslas. We raise less. People buy less gas, so there's less gas tax revenue, and they're still driving, so they're still tearing up the roads, but they're not paying as much gas tax, and we're not collecting as much revenue, and that's a serious problem. And there's ways we can deal with that, and we've talked about some of these, I think. But it's worth exploring and looking at mileage taxes, toll roads, fees on cars, but that's less good. I mean, a mileage tax is actually a very good tax. Got some constitutional issues, and states can't tax mileage outside their jurisdiction, so there's some problems with that. And toll roads are actually very good ways to raise revenue, but we've slapped tolls on just about everything we can, and the public hates them. Anyway, we'll talk more about that, or maybe we won't, but it's certainly worth thinking about. The other big issue is and we've talked about this, is the whole reliance on alcohol and tobacco and marijuana taxes. Sin taxes to fund public goods like education is a little bit ironic, in my view, and hypocritical in many ways, and I just think awful, but that's neither here nor there. The more serious issue with excise taxes is that it is, and they are, not sources of growth, right? The only way you're going to get more cigarette tax revenue is if A, more people smoke, or B, you raise the rate. And when you raise cigarette tax rates or any other excise tax rates, you get less consumption, because if you tax something, you get less of it. So you're not going to, it's hard to get more revenue. It's almost impossible to get more revenue. So if your goal is revenue, which for a lot of people it is the goal, It's not a very good source. Second problem with excise taxes is they are pretty regressive. Not pretty, very regressive. I mean, every study out there shows that whether it's tobacco or alcohol or gasoline for that matter, like most consumption taxes, it is going to be regressive. The poor are going to pay a greater percentage of their income in the tax than the wealthy. We know that. There's a fairness issue. It adds to the overall regressivity of the system, and that, I don't know, not a good thing. Certainly not fair. And you can do it a little bit. You can't, from a fairness standpoint, right? So you can do it if you're doing it for the externalities. You would raise a lot less, right? Because we raise more money on tobacco and probably alcohol, and certainly the road taxes actually even out, but alcohol, marijuana and tobacco taxes, we probably raise more money than the externalities are, probably less so on the alcohol. All right, I'm going to stop now, and we're going to halt this part of the video. I'm going to make another video in about 5 minutes on severance taxes and some other taxes, wealth transfer taxes. So I'm going to post both of these to you for the week of other taxes. And then next week we'll do something else. So I'm going to stop right now.